Welcome to this video on data roles and responsibilities. As part of the data lifecycle, it's important to know the different roles that pertains to data, such as owners, controllers, custodians, processors, the different user and subjects. So in this video, we are going to dive into each of these roles because it's important to know your role. It's very important for approval, execution and other things. So it's important to know exactly what this individual are responsible for. So these data roles really truly define the accountability, and that's what's important to understand. Everyone has to have some accountability when it comes to a data type or an information type. So if there's data or information on a system, someone has to be accountable and responsible for that, especially when it comes to the protection of that data. Now, obviously, we need to know what kind of data we have. We need to discover the data. We need an inventory. We need to keep track of all those assets to understand what's there. Ultimately, the data owner is where everything comes down to. So the data owner has total responsibility and accountability of the access, the use and the protection of their specific data, whatever that might be. For the most part, data owners will own specific type of data, and there's a very good reason for that. For example, if you have a data owner who owns medical information, they would have no business managing financial information because they don't know much about the financial information. And the same holds true with the financial information. You don't want someone who knows all about financial information managing medical information because they don't understand the nonce that are contained with that. So what we normally do is have a data custodian in that case. So if we are responsible for multiple type of data, we want to pick people who clearly understand that data and know the data protection needs of the data, and they will work on behalf of the data owner. So the data owner is accountable and responsible, but allocates some responsibility down to a custodian. So they are going to delegate responsibility, and the custodian is going to implement physical, administrator and logical control to protect the data. Now, the data owner is normally going to define the value and the protection level required for the data. The custodian will be in charge of pretty much trying to implement those protection. So in this case, think of data owner like a manager and the data custodian being an implementer. And the data custodian might also want to involve a data steward. A data steward is considered a subject matter expert as it pertains to the data. They know everything about the data. They are very familiar with the data. So if it's like a secret project or a special project you are working on, maybe it is financial data, maybe it's medical data, maybe it's PI or personal identifiable information data, whatever it might be. The steward is the person you need that's going to help you categorize and classify the data. So the steward can work with custodian, but the steward could also work with the data owner as well. Normally, this is a symbiotic relationship where everyone working together to try to find the best control for the data within the organization. And we also have data subject. Subject and user is often used interchangeably. Data subject are basically individual who are going to consume the data. A user is any individual who operates an information system resources. And typically these users are identified and authenticated. Subject is a general and broad term that used to describe an individual or a resources that can access an object, being a file, a service, a function or something else. These are just broad general terms because sometimes You have scripts, you have a API interface, you have a software application that are trying to interact and pass data. For example, if you have an application that accessing a repository like GitHub or Bitbucket, there's no human interaction involved there. There might be a script that just does a push or does a pull or something like that. That's what you consider subject and object, because there's no user technically involved. Where you have a user is where the user is initiating that exchange of data, whether it's a pull or push or a merge or whatever they are trying to do. Okay, so the subject is just a general term, and it is usually describe of who is going to consume the resources on the system, whereas the object is typically the resource. Two other roles to be familiar with are the data controller and the processor. This is primarily has to do with GDPR regulation. Now, first of all, data controller. These are the natural or legal person who determine the purpose and means of processing personal data. The data controller will determine the purpose and the means. Processor will collect and process on behalf of the controller. So now we are into this data owner, data custodian relationship. So the data controller is technically the data owner. When they determine the purpose and the means, they are responsible for everything that happens to this data under the GDPR regulation. The data processor could be a third-party services. It could be an application. It could be a software as a service application. It could be a lot of different things. Whereas the data processor could be a third-party company or something like that. That's as hired to collect the data on the controller's behalf. A real simple way to think of this is whenever you are surfing the web and you are online and somebody says, hey, would you like to get my new fancy ebook? And it will teach you everything you need to know about the CISSP. When you enter the information, the data controller has determined what level of information to collect: your first name, your email, your phone number, your address, and so on. Whereas the data processor is a software service that's showing you the pop-up, that's processing the email and putting the email into database somewhere. They are equally responsible for the data, okay? But under GDPR, the controller is the ultimate responsibility, whereas the processor is going to be liable if something were to happen in terms of the compromise or something like that during the processing and the collection process. Okay, so when you look at things from a general perspective within the network, the data owner is going to have full responsibility over all the data. For example, if we have data living in the storage server right here, they are sitting there, they are at rest. What is the owner responsible for? They are responsible for access to this information. They are responsible for the use of this information. So if this data coming off the storage server and going over to this web server, the data owner is responsible for the transmission and the control of the data throughout the entire process. They are also responsible for the encryption of the data while it sits in this storage server. So if it is at rest in archive or something like that, we want to encrypt it, make sure it's protected. So if it were to be compromised, the two tenets of security, confidentiality and integrity would not be violated. The custodian would take that responsibility for the data owner. If the data owner said, hey, I don't have time for this and I need some help, cool, the data custodian could step up and say, well, I will take care of that because I understand those data types and that gets served out to our servers. Perfect. But what if there's some specialized data sitting on the server that gets ported over to the web server during special command, during special services? Maybe it's a video streaming service and now you want to bring it the video expert who knows everything about that video and the protection that's involved with that video, how it is stored on this server, how it is protected, how it is opened, how it is accessed, how it is transmitted, all those different things. I don't know all those stuff. So I am going to bring somebody in who does. That's their data. That's the data steward. They will come in and tell us all about it. And then your subject is the person from out here in the internet wants to access the data. They want to get access to the data. They want to watch that awesome CISSP video. So they are the one that want to access the data. And then you have the controller and the processor. So in this regard, you would be probably on a web server, and whatever being collected of this web server from a subject is decided by the controller. The processor will do all of the collection and processing on their behalf. Okay, so hopefully this tie all the roles together, helps you to understand how the roles related to each other, and it's very important to know each of these data roles and the responsibility of this role for the CISSP exam. And you will be tested on this in scenario based questions. So be sure to know each and every one of these thoroughly.